the human in the loop, because the human, as we know, is certainly one of the weakest links in the chain, because it's so easy to manipulate a human being. And by the same token, insider threats have increased. There's a lot out there that the CISO has to worry about.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security, Security Confidential. Today, we have another awesome guest joining us from halfway around the world. But before I introduce her, I got to remind you guys, please hit the like and subscribe button. The algorithms are fairly stern about this. And if you want us to keep bringing you this great content, you got to just hit those buttons. And it'll help us out, or like us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. But with that, I am honored to introduce to you this week, we're going to have Sara Ricci on the podcast. Sara is a cybersecurity and enterprise risk executive with deep expertise in operational resilience, IT risk, and third-party risk management, which we all know has become a hot topic recently. She advises C-suite leaders on building stronger, more resilient organizations in the ever-changing face of cybersecurity threats and operational threats. She's a frequent global speaker and mentor through Executive Women's Forum LIFT program, and is known for her cross-disciplinary approach to risk, combining cybersecurity, business continuity, privacy, and sustainability to help organizations stay resilient. Thank you for joining us, Sara. Honored to have you here.
Thank you, Manoj. Thanks for having me.
So we got to start with a little bit about your background. Tell us your story and how you ended up here.
Oh, my story is very, it's simple, but it's a bit of an interesting move around, because I started with technology, business. I've always been at the intersection of business and technology. And I went through many different industries. I basically grew up in the banks, and most of my life was with the banks. And then I ended up in the power industry, which is also crazy regulated, just like
Wow.
the banking industry, also very highly regulated. And that was a really great experience learning on the ops technology side of things, and also contributing on the IT side, because in the power industry, OT is king. Everything's about SCADA systems,
Yes.
power generation, transmission, etc. And IT sometimes becomes a stepchild. So although it is managed well there as well, it's not as much of a focus as you would see in the banks or in some other industries. So that was a great experience, building out the resilience program over there, plus the enterprise risk. And then I went on to technology services, now on the other side, where I was usually a client. I got to see the other side of things. And again, now this time I went into operational risk, and ended up then in retail, which is totally different from all the other
Oh,
sectors. And there I was responsible for cybersecurity, basically building out the governance risk compliance program, as well as the resilience program. And when I say resilience, it's not just the cyber resilience piece, but the enterprise resilience, the business resilience piece of things.
okay.
So yeah, so starting from banks, where I was global head of all the risks for that particular area where I was in, and then sometimes I focus on cybersecurity and related risks. Sometimes I go broader. So it's been a great travel through industries and through risk disciplines, and always trying to be on the new technology side of things. Making sure that I understand new technologies, keep sight of those, manage the risks around those, and basically just making sure that the organization is always in front rather than on the back foot, and just enjoying the ride while I did it.
Wow. That's quite a journey through a whole bunch of industries, and they're so different. So we know the financial sector oftentimes is regarded as being one of the most mature sectors from a cyber security resilience perspective. And yes, power generation, we actually are working with people in the energy sector space, very familiar with it. They deeply care about it, but maybe they're not as mature as what finance might be. And then retail, I am not familiar with at a personal level. But when you look at all three of these, how would you characterize resilience across them? Is it the same formula for resilience across all three of these diverse sectors that you've been intimate with? Or is there something fundamentally different between all three? And if you might be able to shed some light on that.
Yeah. So again, as you mentioned, the most rigor comes in the banks because they're moving money all the time, and it's a mature practice in resilience across the large banks, at least. So yes, there's definitely a higher maturity level in the banks, but when we say energy sector is not as mature, it's really we're talking just on the IT side. The OT SCADA systems are very mature in the sense that they are also regulated. They have the NERC and FERC that look over their shoulders. So the those ops technology, critical infrastructure protection pieces are pretty well looked after. But on the IT side, because they always kind of felt, hey, we've been around 80 years, nothing's going to happen to us, and plus they felt like there was an air gap between IT and SCADA systems. But over time, that air gap has been compressing quite a bit. And then, as you know, a physical incident can lead to a cyber incident. Somebody could go into your enclosure and go and attack your substation, or somebody could go in and put in a USB into your SCADA system or something like that. So you do need to build the protections on both sides. And some participants in the sector have become more mature over time. But yes, when I went into that area, we did need to bring the rigor from the banks into that area. And as far as one size fits all, it's not even one size fits all across every organization, even in the same industry. But you can use your industry leading practices. And one of your go tos is the ISO 22301 for business resilience. When you're building business resilience, you're really looking at the entire enterprise, right? You have this a similar mindset when you work through it. You will build similar kind of structures, like you will build a steering committee, you will build working groups in how to actually execute on building the program. And of course, your main building blocks are similar. You have the business impact analysis. What you're doing there is looking at what are the business functions, what's critical, and come up with the recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, etc. Understand dependencies, internal and external. What are the third parties that you're really dependent upon? Build the redundancies, build the workarounds, etc. And that's on the business side of every industry, whether it's a power or financial or even retail. So you will probably use the same mindset, the same type of approach from a best practices or leading practices perspective. But again, each organization is different. What are the major building blocks? Like, who are the real stakeholders? They're all going to be different. But I would still say there is a lot of common ground there on starting the execution of the program. And then as you iterate, you will build from there.
Is there something unique in any organization, regardless of the business sector that they're in, that makes the executive team, the stakeholder team, more open to entertaining, if you will, safeguarding of resilience in their organization and accepting controls and accepting structures than others who do not, maybe?
Yeah, so it's very important to get the buy-in, as what you're referring to make sure that you get the support to build those programs. So firstly, when you go in, sometimes there's already some groundwork laid because they've had some failures or somebody has mentioned resilience. So there is some kind of thinking around it, but you really need to build that awareness. There's a constant, kind of communication with the executive to have them understand what it means to be resilient, right? They always want to be making sure that they're protecting the organization, but they may not use the same words that you are using. So really coming down to their level of coming down or up rather to their level of wherever you are talking, whether it's at the executive level or below there, so that they understand what it is that needs to get done, what is your language of communicating. If it's only IT, then you'll kind of lose them, so you need to translate things to them in business terms. And what helps is trying to give them an idea of what happens if they lose something. And doing a rough kind of BIA helps because that shows them what is the business impact of a critical function being lost. And I find that when you work with your enterprise risk management people, you understand what's the risk appetite, what are the financial, the thresholds of loss that are tolerable, etc. What are those tolerance limits? Then you can build your BIA based on, how there would be a financial or regulatory or operational or reputational impact of a critical function not being available. Because ultimately, you want to make sure that the company survives and thrives, and that you're there for your customers. You don't lose reputation, and it becomes like a competitive advantage when you're managing risk at that level. When you're resilient, and we are not just talking. You start with the building block of business resilience, perhaps. Which when I'm talking about business resilience, I'm talking about business continuity planning. I'm talking about disaster recovery, ITDR. I'm talking about emergency management, crisis management. All of these have to work together, and communication is a
Yep.
large part of that. And then when I talk about extending that out to operational resilience, I'm also including cyber resilience, third party resilience, because all of these pieces are what make the entire enterprise resilient. And when I say cyber resilience, it's you're making sure that your incident response plan is in place, right? Because that's where your SOC is fighting the intrusions, and making sure that if there is an incident, there's a rapid action and the resolution of that incident, etc. That there's root cause analysis at the end, and we make sure that we strengthen whatever vulnerability it was that we had. So that's how it ties in, and make sure that your incident response plan, your business continuity plan, your DR plan, all work together during an incident. Now, it could be a cyber incident, it could be an IT outage, it could be a natural disaster. So it could be man-made or non-man-made kind of disruption. So that's a bigger lens than purely thinking about just a system going down and getting back up.
There's the difference right there, right? So there, a lot of our listeners who may be in smaller companies, cybersecurity versus resilience. What's the difference? Because to me, there's intertwining. But Sarah, if you
Yeah, so cyber,
can enlighten us a
absolutely.
little.
So cybersecurity is really about protection, right? It's about protecting your perimeter, protecting your data, and really, when you think about the CIA triad, that's what cybersecurity deals with, right?
Right.
Confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data.
Yep.
So that's a very specific kind of protection that we think about, because it's all caused by the vulnerability of your digital data. And data exists in many forms. It's not just digital. You still have data on paper. You have paper in other form. You have data in other forms than just out there in the cyberspace. It's just that cybersecurity has become the go-to phrase, but it's really part of information risk, because cyber or digital data is part of all your information. So to me, it goes beyond just that piece of data, but cybersecurity per se, I would say it's very well defined in that sense. It's about your CIA triad and making sure that your vulnerability and threats are understood and you are prepared to counter those. What are your countermeasures? And there are many ways to protect your digital systems. And again, it sort of meshes with IT risk as well. But the mistake people make when they talk about the risk of cybersecurity is they think it's an IT risk. Ultimately, it impacts the business. So it's
Yeah.
not just risk to your IT system. What
Right.
happens when that risk shows up, right? What is the impact of that risk? So ultimately, it's the business that runs on those systems, right? So just to think narrowly that cybersecurity is just my digital data and it's just IT or my system outage, etc., because of an attack, because of ransomware or whatever else may have happened, or whatever the incident is, one has to think what is the impact of it. And which is why I think a lot of CISOs who came out of the technical field, and they did, because that's was the natural kind of
Yep.
progression for a lot of people. Hey, you're managing firewalls, okay, let's go do put you in security, you know or something like identity and access management or something. And from one of those fields, you had somebody who
Right.
was able to manage the entire cyber area, and they became a CISO. But what we need to make sure is that the CISO of today is a risk manager, so that they are not just looking at the nuts and bolts of where the IT can be insecure, but also understand the risk and communicate that risk. Because I've had incidents where, or rather, not to use the cyber term of incidents, but instances where I've had a friend who may be a
Yep.
CISO, and we meet for coffee, and they say, you know what, I did a presentation to my C suite and I totally bombed. So I said, so how can I help you? Because it's about communicating what's important, right? So on the resilience side, yes, there is a slightly different mindset, because the resilience people, if you deal with them, those who actually look at enterprise resilience, they have a broader lens, because they're looking across the enterprise, and they are actually looking at business process first. Okay. And then when you do the BIA, you're
Yep.
looking at the critical process, then you see what system supports it, and then how critical is that process, and that
Yep.
system obviously becomes critical as well. And then you do the application impact analysis, and you see what are the dependencies in that whole tech stack, right? To the user, it may be some whatever application they call it, but to the IT person, they know it's the it's the operating system, it is the database, it's the GUI, and the whole thing has to work together for that application to be available. So that's the DR part of it. So sometimes I find that my security people and my resilience people may not always have the same view of things, which is why I'm talking about operational resilience, which means they need to come together. The convergence, which is what we were referring to a little bit earlier. So while they tend to serve similar goals, there's a slightly different mindset. You have your ISO 27001, which is
Yep.
also focused on availability type of things. But on the other hand, there's ISO 22301, which is your business continuity leading practice. And those people need to talk together and just to try to understand each other's viewpoint, and because they're different perspectives of the same thing.
Sure, Sarah, and you bring up a good point here. Like on let's use business email compromise, which is so common. Technically, that's a social engineering attack. It's not something that your SOC is going to pick up because it's not involved with it. You know, so for those things, then I mean, and if you think about it, that can still very much be considered part of cyber. In fact, there was a time when that used to be
Mhm.
covered by cyber insurance policies, and now it's not. It's part of major crimes, at least in the United
Yeah.
States. How do you, um, those shoulder cases like business email compromise or people who are imitating personnel and are able to get passwords from the help desk or are able to break through MFA by
Mhm.
changing the by SIM spoofing. These
Yeah.
are all things that are not going to necessarily show up in any security operations center, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So how are
So
you?
that's.
Yeah, how did? And it's very much a part of resilience, and it's still
Mhm.
very much a part of cyber. How do you
Yeah.
bring those together? Because, like you're saying, a lot of times, well, there was nothing in the sock, so we had nothing to do with it. We're off to the beach.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think we do need to build some more capabilities on that side. And recently I've seen the SOC get more involved with the phishing campaigns and things like that. So when a phish is happening, when a test is happening, we would inform the SOC that you will see a lot of, what seem like attacks come through, but it's really a phishing campaign that's running, right? So I think the SOC needs to get a little bit more involved, as I mentioned earlier as well. And a lot of this also depends on awareness building because not everything will be caught by tools. You can deploy all kinds
Thank
of
you.
tools in the organization, right?
Yeah.
And we have a plethora of tools in every organization, especially once you've been breached. You go and buy everything that's out there,
Right.
right? But ultimately, it's the people who are going to use those tools, to run those tools, analyze the data from those tools, and every person in the organization. We say cybersecurity is not just the CISO's business, it's everybody's business. Security is everybody's job, one, right? Because every person who's touching any kind of data can be a vector if they're not if they're not aware or they're not educated, which is why we run all those awareness campaigns, not just in October. It has to be done all through, not just cybersecurity month or privacy month in
Right.
January. You got to keep building that muscle. And I've had times where the whaling has happened, where somebody impersonated the CEO, asked to transfer money, etc. And luckily, someone was astute enough to kind of, reach out to someone who personally knew the CEO. Like
But that was a
they,
matter of process now, right? And personal action,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So you have to build that muscle and you have to build that culture, not only of being vigilant, but also if you see something, say something. Like we say in New York, if you see something, say something. Report it. If you see something unusual, report it, and maybe we can get in there earlier when we see some anomalies, see some kind of behavior that should not be happening. So I think a lot of it also has to do with the culture. And culture, I think, is very important. It's very much top down to some extent because your senior management has to exhibit the behavior that needs to filter down. And then, of course, with our awareness campaigns, we do the bottom up as well, and we do the top down. And, that way you have better coverage. But again, as somebody, Peter Drucker or someone said, culture eats strategy for lunch, was it, or dinner, or some meal.
Yeah.
And you really need to build that muscle and the culture around, making sure that things don't slip through the cracks.
Well, look at what happened. There was that bank in Hong Kong that it was millions and millions of dollars, right? That
Hmm.
they got away with. It was on a Zoom call, and
Yeah.
the individual was thinking, they were deep fakes on the Zoom
Yes,
call, and
yes.
he was not. In that case, it's a very tough situation because he's got the C-suite on the call, and he's thinking these guys are ordering me to send this money,
Yeah. And they're real to
and they're
him.
real. Now,
Yeah.
there should have been a process of double confirmation there that after you hang up the Zoom, you should pick somebody randomly and really call them and not
Yes.
initiate a 8 or 9 figure transfer of funds
Yeah.
unless you have verbal confirmation from a living human
Yeah.
being, right?
Exactly. So that's where your controls come in place, right? So documented controls where there's segregation of duties, where you need to get approval for certain actions. If you're going to wire money out above a certain amount, somebody has to approve it. Maybe they will need two levels of approvals. Maybe it needs to go up to the CFO, whatever. Those controls need to be built and tested and followed. Because and also, just to kind of think from the other person's perspective, the attack surface has become so much bigger now
Yeah.
than in the last few years with AI, as you mentioned, deep fakes. It's all over the place. You see that, kind of changing the narrative, no matter where it is. It's in your social, your political, your economic life, all over the place. So how do you really educate your people to try to identify these kind of fakes? Because what happens is, firstly, you're exploited for your human emotions. It's all about the human emotion that makes you take certain actions. It's either fear or greed or something of that sort,
All
which
of the
is how you
above. Yeah.
get roped in, or you got fished, or you got whaled, or whatever. And now there's all this phishing going on with the QR codes as well. People, even grandmas now, they know not to click into links. Don't click any link. Go to
Right.
the website and call your bank. Don't just let click into any link that comes in, because it is so easy now for real looking websites to domain names out there. They'll add a little dot or an invisible character or something, and it
Yeah.
looks like the real domain name, right?
Absolutely. And
And
unless
earlier
you
we used
are looking for that, nobody opens up the header to really.
it's yeah, and it's really hard sometimes to detect that. And plus then, there was the time of the Nigerian prince, and there was a
Oh,
time
yeah.
of those badly spelled emails. But now with AI, those spelling mistakes are gone. you know so there's a lot out there that's going on, and it's increased our vulnerability or attack surface, so to speak. And definitely that's an area really want to focus on, because it's really about the human in the loop. Because the human, as we know, is certainly one of the weakest links in the chain, because it's so easy to manipulate a human being. And by the same token, insider threats have increased, right? So there's a lot out there that the CISO has to worry about.
Yeah, yeah, there is. So, and you can't possibly defend against everything.
Yes.
It's not possible. So you have to pick your battles on what
Yeah.
you think are the top 3, 4 things and really harden that in your resilience exercise. When
Yeah.
we look at resilience, I guess one thing, there's 2 things I want to get to. One is third party risk, because that
Hmm.
is a big, big topic. We've seen that come up over and over again, where you have third parties that either have access to your systems or
Yes.
your they have access maybe not to your systems, but they still have use of your data, right?
Yeah.
And what's your approach to managing third party risk?
Yeah. So, firstly, you need to know who are your third parties. It's really hard for a lot of companies, especially the big ones, to know their entire universe of third parties. Just like it's really hard for a lot of them to identify all their crown jewels. And some of them don't even have CMDBs. Sometimes the CMDB is not good enough, it's corrupted and all of that. So
Yep.
those are the problems. But with third party risk, I think one of the main risks with it today, because we have a lot of hardware, software, third parties, is a cyber risk around it, right? So how do you manage that risk? Firstly, again, once your procurement cycle has run, you have the contract risk, obviously, you have your legal involved. And from the cybersecurity or the information risk side of things, you really need to kind of, tier your third parties, figure out who carry the most risk. Because you cannot really spread your resources across everything. You want to figure
Correct.
out who's most highest risk third parties, who's most critical to your process, who's holding PII, who's holding PCI card data, and kind of strike them by the amount of risk that comes with them. And the really low ones, maybe you don't need to reassess them all the time. But the high risk third parties, definitely you want to assess them, and you want to assess them well. You want to make sure that you understand what kind of risk they are bringing to you. And yes, because they might be very critical to your process, and stop thinking of them as just some vendor. Think of them as partners so that you get cooperation from them, because in the procurement side of things, yes, we do category management, but supplier risk or relationship management is also very important, so that when you send out that questionnaire, they don't send you junk back in the answers. You want to get the right answers from them. You want to make sure that if they are going to work with PII or any kind of sensitive data, or any kind of proprietary data, you have to make sure you do all your due diligence. And some of the ways we do it is because we can't all go and test everything at the third parties on site. Sometimes you have to rely on other people's testing them, like a SOC 2 type 2, for instance. Get them pen tested, make sure they have incident response plans, make sure they have business continuity plans, try to figure out what happens during an outage, how will they support you in your outage, their outage, both your outages, what happens if it's a single or a sole provider or a single source provider, do you have alternatives? Can you get another provider? Now look at what happened during COVID. That whole supply chain was disrupted because we are geographically distributed now all over the place. So what are the risks that come from a geopolitical perspective? Look at the privacy in each jurisdiction. You've got GDPR, you've got everybody's privacy laws in so many different jurisdictions. So what is the risk if they're not protecting that kind of data as well? So you need that. And again, reassess them more frequently if they are more critical, and maybe the low ones once in a while, or if something changes. And then on the other hand, you have other tools where they're going to look at their financial viability, make sure they don't go bankrupt. And if that happens, what kind of exit clauses you have in your contracts. You want to make sure that there's a security addendum in your contract if needed. Work with legal, work with procurement, work with the business. So sometimes the GRC or third party risk within cybersecurity becomes one of the major pieces where you might have to actually say, hey, hold off, there's too much risk. Maybe this vendor needs to implement a buff. And that's where you will sometimes have friction because the COO or whoever wants to onboard a third party for a very critical project, they are doing some major uplift, and now you're stopping that. You're becoming a roadblock. So instead of becoming a roadblock, you have to figure out how you manage that risk, how you treat that risk, right? Because there are four things you can do with risk, right? You
Right.
can either avoid it, mitigate it. You can't transfer it in this case, but you could all,
So accept it.
accept it within your risk appetite. And then the person who's accepting it has to be accountable, and they need to understand what they're exposing the organization to. Is it within that acceptable limit? And also, when they sign that risk acceptance, you still want to make sure that WOF is implemented, and give them a target date to get it done. And then just work with them, make sure it's done, test it, and then onboard the vendor. Sometimes that's where the friction happens, because the moment you tell them to sign a risk acceptance, it's like you ask them to sign off their firstborn.
Sarah, what you're describing is a very frictional process from what we have seen when in practice.
Yeah.
Because as you say, there's always a deadline that I
Yeah.
need this vendor manufactures this very specialty widget for us, and we
Hmm.
must use them. We can't
Yes.
purchase this somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And then that widget manufacturer may not know the first thing about cybersecurity. And
Hmm.
now we're asking them to implement a WAF. And they're like, well, what is that? Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I kid you not. This is real world examples.
this
These
is
things
real world.
happen.
I've
It,
lived
it
through it. I'm
happens.
sure you've lived through it.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of friction and
Yeah,
everyone's yelling at each other saying, well, how do we run the business? I think
yeah,
calm minds need to prevail here and really understand why the risk is there. And then maybe there's some other way to mitigate it.
exactly. Yeah, some
Right?
compensating control, right?
Some control can be there. Maybe
Yeah,
we air gap them completely from the organization and we
yeah,
accept we will pass paper until they implement the WAF. And it might be
exactly.
good enough for this one project. But if they
Yeah.
want a long-term relationship with us, then they must do these things.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's the risk manager's role. Sometimes you have to sit in that kind of position where you don't want to be a roadblock. You want to be a business enabler, but it's more like helping them go through what they need to do. Don't stifle innovation, don't stifle progress, but try to get them on the other side safely. And once they understand, for instance, when you explain it properly, then sometimes they'll understand and they say, well, okay, maybe I can hold off a little bit and let's get this implemented. And let's just make sure it's done quickly. Because then that, focus leads to the vendor. When the focus comes from the business owner who wants it done, it leads to a quicker response also sometimes
Oh,
from the
yeah.
vendor.
Now there's a real sense of urgency. Nothing speaks like money, right? Once
Yeah.
contracts are on the line, people start acting.
It's become really important that we understand what's the ingredient in each ingredient in that software or whatever they're selling, the SBOM, right? The bill of
Well,
materials. And that creates its own challenges because if you get a really long list and you don't even know how to really
that's a
analyze,
huge problem, Sarah.
that
I
becomes
have
a
not
huge
seen anyone
challenge.
really figure that out. I mean, you
It's
look
a
at
huge
like medical
challenge.
device manufacturers, how many open source systems are embedded in their
Yeah,
devices?
exactly.
And I can guarantee you, regardless of what anybody says, they have not gone through every single license agreement, every single user agreement,
Yeah.
and understood what exposures they have.
Yes. So third party risks are really huge. And that brings us to fourth party risks, right?
Okay.
Because,
Ex-
and banks have been doing it for a while, because the regulators have asked them to look at their fourth parties too, because that third party deals with another third party, a sub-service provider, and you don't know what that vendor is doing. So how do you make sure that the fourth party risk is not conveyed up the chain to you? That is another issue because sometimes you can get more transparency on what that third party is using as a fourth party, and sometimes it's really hard to get. So
yeah.
there might be a risk in this third party is getting some component that has something in it that even they don't know about. So that fourth party risk that lies out there, that's huge too. So what do you do about that? So third party risk, supply chain resilience, they're all really things that are top of mind for a lot of people right now because we've seen failures due to them. So it's like sometimes you're just keeping on chasing your tail just to try to try to get to the end of the story, but you still have to do the due diligence because if you never do it, and then something happens, at least you have some auditable documentation saying you tried your best, something slipped through the cracks, at least the CISO's head is not on a platter just because they didn't get it done, right? Not just CISO, the whole organization is at risk at that point. And it's really important because your reputation is on the line, your competitiveness is on the line. So I think that's a conversation. Resilience, supply chain, they are really out there at the board level as well.
So, Sarah, as I hear you speak, maybe I spent many lifetimes ago, I was in the aircraft industry. And maybe, their resilience is a very big thing.
Hmm.
And maybe there's a page out of their book that would be warranted here is, what's the minimum to keep the plane in the air? Okay. Everything else is frills, you know. We
Yeah,
need the
I mean,
altimeter.
basically,
We need a we need our altimeter. We need a barometer. We need a
yeah,
compass.
yeah,
We need
yeah,
our flight controls. Everything else that's in there,
everything.
that's frills. At a minimum, to stay resilient and stay operational, we must have these 4 or 5 things functioning. If everything
Yeah,
else breaks down, it'll be inconvenient, but we won't stop.
yeah. That's a very high risk industry, obviously, as you know. And what is important is that every takeoff must equal a landing,
Yep.
right? Whatever takes off must land safely.
Come exactly.
So, there's so many safety checks that happen there as well. But we still have, once in a while, we will have an incident that will be huge. And then what happens there? You try to figure out what went wrong and root cause analysis, and sometimes it's a mechanical failure. It could be a human failure, just like any other
Look,
risk in any other
yeah,
industry.
there will always be those. I mean, look, if you look at our attack surface, it is so large. There will always be something that can get through. The question is, can you minimize the damage when that
Yes.
does happen?
Mhm.
And by the way, wow, we have not gotten through these questions, but it is almost the hour here. We got 2 minutes. I wanted to give you a chance, Sarah, to plug anything you want to plug. Any talks, books, anything that you would like our listeners to know about as well.
Well, it's the day of AI, so keep your eye on the AI publications. You have the ISO 42001, you have the NIST AI RMF. As I mentioned earlier, I was working with them on the CSF update to version 2.0 with the govern function. Then we brought the privacy framework to sync up with that to 1.1. And now we're working on the cyber AI profile. So keep your eyes on developments on how we can build guardrails. Keep your eye on new technology, how we can improve things, increase productivity, innovation, etc. But also how we can make it safe and secure, because you don't want to pay on the other end when you can avoid it. Be proactive, think with a risk mindset rather than only a purely compliance, check the box. Because when you think proactively, you will go out there and look for the risk. You'll say, hey, this is my activity, this is what I do. What could go wrong? How can I control this? This control, does it work? Is it a full control, key control that will take care of the risk, or is it a compensating control? Is it predictive? Is it detective? And let's test it. Does it work? How effective is my control? How effective is my control environment? And then you can, at least, maybe you can use an RCSA methodology. So think on a holistic level, not just one particular silo. And cybersecurity is a huge risk today, and any new risk that comes out, you want to keep your eye on it. And AI, as I mentioned, it's you mentioned as well, with the deep fakes, the attack surface increasing. Keep an eye on the guardrails as well. How can we make it more explainable, transparent, and fair, free of prejudice, free of bias, and model drift. Look at model validation, and all the things that help keep it manageable and safe and productive at the same time. So tech plus cyber plus risk management, it's all out there, and it's all a great world. I'm so passionate about all of this, and just to be on the learning curve all the time. Just keep learning. I just love to keep
Oh,
learning.
yeah, there you go.
So next thing I think I'm doing is Risk America's conference. I'm talking about, I think, operational risk, enterprise risk, cyber, all of them, RCSA's risk appetite, and all of those wonderful things. So that's a plug for you.
There you go. Fantastic. Well, uh, Sarah, it's been a pleasure to have you here. We didn't have enough time to get into everything, but appreciate your sound knowledge and advice. And, keep us updated. If anything you want to ever talk about, you're always welcome back. Let our audience know.
All right. Thank you very much, Manoj. Very nice chatting with you. I really appreciate the ability to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.